Imagine an obsession so all-consuming that it becomes the air you breathe, the language spoken by your subconscious. For some it is music, for others art. But for Gemma Lilly from Australia, this obsession became bloodthirsty criminals, the very ones who left a terrible mark on history, those whom society calls serial killers. Her interest was not idle curiosity. It was an obsession that took root in her brain and blossomed into dark fantasies that became brighter and more real than the surrounding world. Gemma didn't just read about criminals, she was writing a book. She didn't just dream, she arranged a wedding permeated with the aesthetics of the dark genre. The pinnacle of Gemma's wish list was something inexpressibly frightening. This is a story about two women who saw their own reflection in each other, about a room created not for living, but for the embodiment of the darkest scenario, and about an innocent youth whose life unwittingly became a prize in someone else's game. This is the story of Gemma Lilly, Trudy Lennon, and Aaron Pajich. Today, we will look into that part of the human psyche where the line between fantasy and action, between hobby and crime, is blurred, and try to understand what pushes a person to turn the darkest plots into a plan of real events. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot, thank you. Gemma Lilly was born in 1991. Her childhood was spent in Lincolnshire, UK, alongside her parents and younger brother and sister. At the age of 6, Gemma was diagnosed with dyslexia. This is a specific impairment of the ability to read and write against the background of normal intelligence. With the disorder, problems with recognizing similar letters and difficulties with remembering words are observed, meaning the child is able to study normally, but at the same time experiences problems with reading or writing. In other respects, everything was fine for Gemma, at least until her mother had a mental breakdown and joined a religious cult. This cult had a strong influence on the woman's behavior. She gave up all her property and accumulated savings in favor of the sect. In addition, her character changed. Gemma's mother became cruel and began to abuse her own children. Gemma was often beaten, locked in a room without food, and treated poorly. However, it was not only the children who suffered, but also the husband. Gemma's father, Richard, tried to influence his wife in some way, did everything in his power to return a normal mother to the children. But in the end, after 2 years of suffering and humiliation, he gave up and left the family, taking the children with him. In any case, the time spent with the monster mother did not pass without consequences for Gemma. At age 12, she began to suffer from obsessive ideas related to the massacre of people. The schoolgirl became interested in documentaries about serial killers and began to collect meat cleavers as a hobby. Gemma dressed in dark clothes, pretending to be a criminal, and fantasized about the topic of a violent death. The teenager imagined how she would create a torture chamber where she would bring all her offenders, people who had once harmed her, and would mock them and then finish them off and get rid of the remains. This was the strange reaction Gemma had to the abuse she suffered at the hands of her mother. The girl was angry not only at her mother, she hated the whole world. Over time, Richard had a new partner, Nana. The woman immediately felt uncomfortable in Gemma's presence. She was uneasy because of the teenager's dark, obsessive ideas. However, whenever Nana shared her concerns with Richard, he ignored them. The man, like an ostrich, hid his head in the sand and didn't even want to hear about his daughter's strange hobbies. Gemma spoke openly about her ghastly dreams. Her father knew that she was obsessed with serial killers and wanted to become one of them. But Richard stubbornly pretended that nothing terrible was happening. Perhaps if Gemma had received the necessary psychological help as a child, this story would never have happened. Anyway, a few more years passed. Gemma was now in high school and was a diligent student. The girl, who possessed a fairly high intelligence, received high marks. By age 15, she discovered a new passion, literary creativity. In the teenager's head, incredibly dark and sharp plots about a serial killer were born. The schoolgirl came up with a character who dealt with people in incredibly colorful ways and gave him the nickname SOS. This name was chosen for the main character, not by chance, but in honor of the American serial killer, David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam. Gemma was simply obsessed with this criminal who took the lives of several people. The girl also made her fictional character the leader of a cult whose followers brutally tortured and sent innocent people to the next world just to please their leader. Surely the resentment toward her mother, who abandoned her children for some sect, found its reflection in the schoolgirl's writings. A quote from her story: "I feel that I cannot rest until the blood or flesh of a screaming, pleading victim gushes out and spreads everywhere." This would be too dark and creepy for any author, especially for a 15-year-old teenager. But unfortunately, ruthless torture and bloody massacres were the only topics that aroused a keen interest in Gemma. Richard knew everything and even read his daughter's ghastly creations, but did nothing to help her. Meanwhile, Gemma wrote a 200-page novel centered on the fictional character Heinous, a serial killer and leader of a criminal cult. The girl was so immersed in her fantasy world that she almost stopped distinguishing fiction from reality. In honor of the main character, she even got an SOS tattoo on her body, signed with his name, and told people that whenever she got angry, an alarm went off. It seemed Gemma was trying to completely transform into her fictional character. The schoolgirl's father continued to be aware of the events, but it didn't bother him much. The man supported his daughter's desire to express herself in literature and considered all of Gemma's ideas just a way to get rid of the negativity accumulated from childhood. But Gemma's stepmother, Nena, was still in shock from her stepdaughter. When she tried to discuss this with Richard, he only brushed it off. He didn't want to hear anything about his daughter's psychological problems, apparently considering her fantasies just a manifestation of teenage rebellion. Nena tried her best to reach Gemma, to help her try to change her behavior, but the girl was against it. And the older she got, the more cruel and disturbing her fantasies became. Nena couldn't take it anymore, and one day called Gemma a psychopath, devoid of compassion. 2 years later, due to the schoolgirl's provocative behavior, Nena broke off her relationship with Richard. In 2010, when Gemma was 18, she decided to start a new independent life and moved to another country, away from her family. The girl settled in the large city of Perth, located in southwestern Australia on the shores of the Indian Ocean, and got a job in a supermarket. Colleagues considered Gemma a pretty, sociable, and very cheerful young person. Her true face was revealed about 5 months after the move. Gemma, feeling the favor of other employees, told them about her hobbies, torture, and cruel massacres that she loved to describe in her stories. Colleagues were surprised, and when Gemma brought her book to work and read excerpts, the supermarket employees were in shock. It seemed to them that they worked with a pleasant, even somewhat funny person, but in reality, it turned out that she composed stories about abusing innocent victims. But colleagues were even more struck by the collection of meat cleavers that Gemma dragged from home to show off. At that time, in her spare time from work, Gemma was engaged in promoting her own book. She created a social media page where she posted fragments of her work. One day, the girl finally achieved her goal and actually published her creation under the pseudonym Sin Demon, and also became a guest author for a magazine about serial killers. Gemma wrote articles about notorious Australian criminals such as Eric Edgar Cook and Martin Bryant. In 2012, when Gemma had already lived in Australia for 3 years, she was informed that she needed a special visa to remain in the country. The girl had no idea how to get this visa and did not want to return to England. She had to take some action, and Gemma decided to arrange a fake marriage. Somehow, she persuaded her friend of non-traditional orientation, Gordon, to take her as his wife. This marriage was fake and was organized solely so that Gemma could get a visa and stay in Australia. The wedding was distinguished by the strangest dress code imaginable. All guests were to dress as notorious criminals or fictional horror movie characters. The bride herself came in a costume of the television serial killer Dexter. Her father, Richard, flew to the wedding in a Freddy Krueger costume, the hero of the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street. For her fake groom, Gordon, Gemma chose the nickname John Wayne Gacy, as he slightly resembled the famous American criminal in appearance. So Gemma and Gordon got married and began to live together. To everyone around her, the young woman said that their marriage was absolutely legal and real. However, it was later revealed that Gemma repeatedly engaged in intimate relationships with other people outside of marriage. Be that as it may, the fake marriage lasted about 2 years. In 2014, Gordon tragically took his own life for unknown reasons, and Gemma got what she wanted. Now she had permanent residency in Australia and she was left to her own devices. However, the husband's voluntary departure from life, even if he was a fake one, had very destructive consequences for the young woman's future life. After Gordon's death, Gemma had serious mental problems. For a while, she returned to England to live with her father and even admitted to Richard that she did not want to return to Australia. But the father convinced his daughter that she would be better off there. That is how Gemma flew back to Australia, planning to live in this country for the rest of her life. She purchased her own house and could fully devote herself to creativity. For the first time in her life, left alone, the young woman immersed herself in the world of fantasies she had created in her book. Her dark, obsessive ideas intensified, and Gemma couldn't stop thinking about serial killers and their crimes. Her obsession with torture and violence increased so much that now she herself wanted to harm someone for her own pleasure. For the first time in her life, Gemma seriously thought that she wanted to take a person's life and do it with extreme cruelty. While her previous work flickered with ideas of how to get revenge on her offenders, now she simply wanted to take a life. And it wasn't even revenge or anger at the whole world. Gemma just dreamed of doing it for entertainment. She was simply delighted at the prospect of gaining control over the life of a stranger, no matter whose. One morning, 23-year-old Gemma Lilly made a wish list, and the first item on it was the desire to send someone to the next world. She openly told friends and colleagues about her perverted dreams that she was actually thinking about a massacre, but no one took her words seriously. Everyone thought it was just artistic fiction, a joke, or stupid fantasies. Meanwhile, the desire grew and became stronger. Soon, Gemma could no longer control it, and in any conversation mentioned the need to see someone's death. Gemma continued to talk about the specific desire to break the law, but no one reported her to the police. People considered Lilly a bit strange and simply avoided communicating with her if possible. In 2016, 24-year-old Gemma met a woman named Trudy Lennon. Trudy was 42 years old. She was a single mother living in Perth, Australia. Lennon was interested in BDSM, was part of the community, and always attended meetings and events related to her hobby. She was a submissive, meaning in relationships she preferred to obey, and decorated her body with tattoos of the names of her former dominant partners. In early 2016, Trudy Lennon was going through a difficult period. The partner she was engaged to had recently left her. Because of this, the woman had financial difficulties. She couldn't pay rent and worried about where her children would live. It was at this point that Trudy first met Gemma. The women met through a mutual friend and immediately found a common language. They began to meet often, go somewhere together, flirt, and learn about each other's intimate preferences. Soon, a relationship of dominance and submission was established between them. Gemma was the dominant partner and took her usual pseudonym SOS. Trudy was the submissive and bore the name Corvina. She also got a new tattoo with the name SOS. Literally, a few weeks after meeting, Gemma suggested that Trudy move into her house, and she gladly agreed, as she was worried about the well-being of her 3 children. She had serious financial difficulties, and Gemma's offer was very timely. At first, everything went wonderfully. The women spent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week together, enjoying each other's company. However, the situation soon changed. Gemma finally showed her true face and shared with her new friend fantasies on the topic of massacre and torture. She gave Trudy her book to read and told her about her cherished desire to take someone's life. Lennon should have understood that Lilly posed a real danger to her and the children and left, but instead, she plunged headlong into her partner's ghastly hobbies to please her. They began to play role-playing games where Gemma pretended to be a maniac and Trudy a victim. The house was decorated with all kinds of horror-style decorations. Posters from horror movies hung on the walls of the living room, and miniature copies of movie villains were located on the shelves of the cupboard. The women called their house Elm Street. Gemma even bought a motorcycle with the registration number 1SOS1. It would have been good if Gemma's obsessive ideas had remained in the world of fantasies, or at least only in love games with her girlfriend, but soon they crawled out into reality, and this led to very sad consequences. Gemma spent most of her time talking about her desire to commit a crime, and Trudy, without asking any questions, immediately agreed to participate in this. The women had lived in the same house for only 3 weeks and were already ready to commit a massacre. Gemma didn't stop saying that she needed a victim, and one day, Trudy stated that she had a suitable candidate in mind. His name was Aaron Pajich. Aaron Pajich was that rare person whose soul turned out to be completely made of light. At 18, living with his father and stepmother in Perth, Australia, he maintained a touching, almost childlike purity of perception. Every weekend the young man went to church, not out of habit, but out of a sincere need of the soul. His closeness with his parents was not a formal connection, but a deep, warm union. Aaron was an incredibly kind and cheerful young man. His wide and open smile spoke of the purity of his soul. But this bright inner world existed in a fragile shell. The fact was that Aaron suffered from an autism spectrum disorder, and his mental health made him vulnerable. School for the young man became not a place of knowledge, but a field of quiet daily struggle. He faced bullying, mockery, and cruelty from classmates who did not understand or accept his characteristics. In this unfriendly world, his main refuge and protector was the teacher, Megan. For Aaron, she was not just a teacher, a guardian angel, almost a friend who saw in him not a strange guy, but a person. Studying was difficult for Aaron. The standard education system was a complex labyrinth for him, but his mind found an outlet in the digital world. He showed a lively, passionate interest in computer science. Disassembling computer programs and immersion in video games were for him not entertainment, but an exciting exploration of a universe where logic and rules were clear and fair. Despite being bullied at school and the pain he was caused, Aaron did not become bitter. On the contrary, he tried his best to open up to the world and make friends. His main and most dangerous trait was that he saw only the good in people. He was blind to bad intentions, to falsehood, to cruelty. This naive, almost holy faith in the kindness of others made him an easy target for manipulation. People with impure thoughts quickly recognized him as an ideal victim. Pajich had a small group of friends with whom he sometimes spent time. His favorite topic of conversation was unusual stories about Japan. Aaron was a passionate fan of superheroes and anime. He was fascinated by the entire Japanese culture. He didn't just watch, he learned the language, dreaming of the moment when he could speak Japanese. This dream was a beacon for him. He had already begun to save money so that after school he could realize his cherished goal: to go to the land of the rising sun, a place that in his imagination was just as bright and full of wonders. Aaron Pajich was not just a teenager with characteristics. He was a walking contradiction, a complex inner world and naive simplicity in his view of others, digital logic, and a romantic dream of a far-off country. All this made him a unique, bright person, but this same purity made him vulnerable. All Aaron Pajich wanted in life was just to become happy, settle down, and start a family. But the guy's life changed as soon as Trudy Lennon, who had known him since childhood, told Gemma Lilly about him. Trudy really had known Aaron for many years, as they had lived on the same street for a long time. She saw the boy grow up. Besides, one of Trudy's sons was friends with Aaron, considering him a family friend. Despite this, the woman suggested Pajich as an ideal victim for an attack. Unfortunately, Aaron himself had no idea who Trudy Lennon really was. As soon as the woman told Gemma about her plan regarding the naive teenager, she fired up even more with the idea of committing a brutal massacre. She couldn't get the thoughts of torture and violent death out of her head. Gemma plunged back into creativity and added new chapters to her book. Lily, trying to please her girlfriend, made a list on a piece of paper of various methods of torture she planned to apply to her victim: branding, castration, breaking bones, roasting legs, forced feeding, mutilating operations on genitals, oxygen starvation, scalping, Chinese water torture, and much more. Gemma became so carried away by the ghastly fantasies that she wanted to build her own torture chamber at home. On Elm Street, as they called their home, the women set aside a room that they planned to convert into a torture chamber. They lined the walls with blue tarpaulin to make it easier to wash away potential bloodstains. In the center, they placed a heavy bed for tying up the victim, and in a metal cupboard, they put various tools necessary for torture. There was a collection of meat cleavers that Gemma had been collecting for several years, scalpels for skinning, and a saw for cutting bone. Gemma and Trudy often visited DIY departments to purchase the necessary equipment and tools for torture. All their shopping trips were recorded by CCTV cameras. The women also bought bleach in advance to clean up the scene of the incident, a circular saw, cement for burying body parts, and a massive plastic barrel of hydrochloric acid with a volume of 100 liters, which was enough to dissolve a human body. To be sure the acid would work, the conspirators bought a large piece of meat in advance and threw it into the acid. Gemma and Trudy were so confident in their own impunity that they calmly discussed the massacre plans in correspondence, leaving a digital trail behind them. When the torture chamber was ready, the thirst to act increased even more. Now Gemma constantly talked about Aaron Pajich and what she would do to him. Lily believed that it was necessary to rid the planet of such losers and pathetic little people as Aaron, because the world was already overpopulated. This statement clearly demonstrated Gemma's arrogance, as she considered her crime almost a great mission. Finally, the bloodlust became so strong that the pair decided to move from reflection to action. Aaron Pajich was having breakfast when the phone rang. Trudy Lennon, the mother of his friend, was calling. She asked the young man to help install gaming software on her 14-year-old son's computer. Aaron, being an experienced computer technician and a friend of the Lennon family, happily agreed to help. At about 10 a.m., Aaron arrived at the shopping center where Trudy had arranged to meet him. Pajich was last seen on June 13, 2016, on CCTV cameras at a taxi stand. The guy was caught on frame when he was heading to the designated place, holding an iPad in his hands. After that, Trudy took Aaron to Elm Street. In Gemma's house, the young man sat down at the computer and began work on installing the program. Trudy treated him to a cup of coffee, and she herself went to the kitchen, to another part of the house, for a knife. Gemma Lily, taking advantage of the moment, came out of her hiding place, clutching a metal wire in her hands. She silently crept up on the guy from behind, threw the wire over his neck, and began to strangle him. Everything happened suddenly. Aaron, who absolutely did not expect an attack in his friend's house, immediately felt the threat and began to resist. He bit Gemma on the hands, trying to free his neck from the garrote, and his efforts were rewarded. The wire snapped. The young man's behavior at once destroyed all the conspirators' plans. They didn't even mentally admit that the victim would resist, so they continued to act according to the situation. Returning from the kitchen, Trudy Lennon pinned Aaron to the floor, and Gemma attacked him with a knife. The guy desperately defended himself with his hands, covering his body from the sharp blade. Because of this, his hands were badly wounded. But despite all his efforts, Gemma managed to inflict 2 knife wounds to his neck and 1 to his chest. One of the wounds turned out to be fatal. 18-year-old Aaron Pajich was cold-bloodedly stabbed to death in a friend's house, where he came to help sort out the computer. His life ended for no reason, just so that Gemma Lily could realize her cruel fantasies. After the youth's death, Gemma and Trudy realized that everything had not gone according to plan, for they had carefully prepared the torture chamber, intending to bring the victim there and carry out all the planned torments. But the victim offered resistance, for which Gemma was completely unprepared. Instead of regretting what she had done, Lily felt disappointment. She was angry that she finished Aaron off so quickly. The women still had to move the youth's body to the torture chamber. Trudy panicked because her children, including her 14-year-old son, who was Aaron's friend, were due back from school soon. Now, she and Gemma needed to urgently get rid of the body. The initial plan was to dissolve the dead body in a barrel of acid, but time was short and the children might have questions. The women quickly dug a shallow grave in the backyard of the house and buried Pajich's remains. When the children returned home, Trudy asked her 14-year-old son to help her lay paving stones in the backyard. The boy agreed. He had no idea that his friend Aaron's dead body lay under these stones. Having gotten rid of the corpse and evidence, Gemma sent Trudy the following message. "I see what I haven't seen before. I feel what I haven't felt before. It is incredibly inspiring. Thank you." To which she received words of support from her partner. The next day, June 14th, Aaron never returned home. His mobile phone was turned off, and no one understood where the young man could have gone. Later that same day, Aaron was declared missing. The police began an investigation and appealed to the public for any information. However, no leads appeared. The detectives had no idea where to look for the guy, and it seemed that Trudy and Gemma would get away with the serious crime. A total of 5 days passed, but no one ever came for them. Gemma was sincerely convinced that the police would not pick up their trail, so she began to fantasize about the next massacre. For more than anything in the world, this woman dreamed of becoming a serial killer about whom legends would be written. She believed that one day she could become a notorious criminal and stand on a par with her idols. Having managed to finish off Aaron and avoid punishment at the same time, Gemma felt so invulnerable that she bragged about her deed at work. The colleague with whom Lily shared her secret was at first confused and decided that she had finally lost her mind due to her wild fantasies. But when Gemma told her the agonizing details of the ghastly massacre of Aaron Pajich, she became terrified and immediately went to the police, telling the detectives about her friend's ghastly secret. Lily was bursting with pride. She wanted to shout to the whole world that she had taken a person's life. At the same time, she sacredly believed that the colleague would never give her up. This overconfidence became the downfall of Gemma and Trudy. On June 20th, 2016, a week after Aaron's death, police arrived at Elm Street. Detectives searched the house but found no traces of the young man. Perhaps they would have left, deciding that the tip was a false alarm. However, Gemma, on her own initiative, led the law enforcement officers to the backyard and began to brag about the new tiles. Apparently, she was eager to prove her superiority over the police and laugh at how she literally shoved their noses into the burial place. The next day, detectives returned to Elm Street with a search warrant, found a torture chamber with erased bloodstains on the floor, and dug up the backyard. They also found dozens of knives, scalpels, saws, a list of possible tortures, and CCTV recordings showing Aaron entering Lily's house. Gemma and Trudy were immediately arrested. A year later, in October 2017, both women stood trial, and surprisingly, they turned against each other. Trudy accused Gemma of her desire to take a human life, and she, in turn, shifted the blame to Lennon, motivating it by saying that it was her friend who brought Aaron to the house as a victim. However, the evidence clearly pointed to their joint involvement in the serious crime. The court ruled that Gemma Lilly wanted to imitate the main character of her book, and that the book itself clearly showed the author's character and her enthusiastic obsession with serial killers and violent crimes in general. In the end, both women were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 28 years behind bars. This is one of the longest prison sentences in Western Australian history. Gemma's father still assures that she is innocent. Richard says that he knows his daughter well and is sure that she would never raise a hand against a defenseless autistic teenager. The man said that in a frank conversation, Gemma admitted to him how everything really happened. At the same time, the daughter looked sincere, so he did not doubt her honesty. Richard also believes the case was rigged. Even despite the court's sentence, the father was not ready to admit his daughter's guilt. It seems he still hides his head in the sand, just not to accept the truth. Some things remain unchanged. Aaron's death was so meaningless that it seems that 28 years behind bars is little for such a crime. The fact that Gemma and Trudy's plan was never carried out to the end does not negate its monstrosity. This story is not about a specific crime. It is a warning that the darkest fantasies do not always remain on the pages of books or in the depths of the subconscious. Sometimes they find a way out, take shape, materialize in specific plans, and, most frighteningly, find accomplices who do not condemn but encourage. Gemma Lilly and Trudy Lennon at some point forgot that someone else's pain is not entertainment, and someone else's life is not a plot for realizing dark fantasies. But will they find time behind bars to rethink all this? If you are finished watching, you're a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give it a like. See you in the next video.